Have you ever wondered what it would be like if wizards had burst fire? Or if a storm sorcerer could actually tase you to death? Or perhaps a priest in full riot armor with smoke grenades as their flail? Who thinks of these things? Tactical Breach Wizards is a turn-based tactics game that puts a very fun and interesting twist on the genre's formula. On the one hand, it has all the style of a tactical SWAT game where breaching and clearing a room is the primary gameplay loop. On the other hand, you can window breach with a witch's broom. As the name implies, military magic is very much apparent in Wizards, and while the game may look outlandish in its amalgamation of magic and military, it makes for one of the best turn-based tactics games that you'll play this year. With a myriad of different powers at your disposal to experiment and play with, not only does this create for some magically deep and tactical gameplay, it also gives Wizards some of the best and most outlandish humor that you'll see in gaming. So, without further ado, here's a quick little review on Tactical Breach Wizards. Gameplay is the most unique aspect that Wizards is going to offer you. If you've ever played any of the turn-based isometric tactics games like XCOM, some of these systems will seem familiar. Your primary gameplay objective is to breach and clear a room full of enemies, while occasionally having to clear certain objectives. The game operates on a phase system, where your team gets to act first before the enemy team gets to react. You can move, use simple spells that require action, use more powerful spells that require mana, or utility spells and items that have limited use. Each character that you control has a different set of abilities that you can use to combat enemies. Zan can project copies of himself to distract, Jen can easily defenestrate enemies, and yes, that's a word, or Banks can heal you by killing you, then resurrecting you. As the game progresses, the other team members that join you further add to the combat complexity alongside additional enemy types that you'll get to face. It's an ability system that allows for different creative combinations, and it was immensely enjoyable to use each of the different characters to clear a room. Not to mention you can also upgrade character abilities as you progress. What really makes this gameplay combination work even better though, is the rewind system. Zan also provides you with a system mechanic of rewinding time in order to undo whatever actions you perform since the start of the phase, even to the point of foreseeing enemy actions and undoing them as well. Unlike tactical games where you often have to commit to the action that you perform, Wizards incentivizes you to liberally use this mechanic and experiment with different ability combinations in order to take out the enemy with great, or not so great effect. This is by far what made the game immensely enjoyable for me, as I was able to freely experiment with different abilities and see what worked and what didn't. As a person who is guilty of save scumming in XCOM in order to get the desired outcome that I wanted, this is exactly what Wizards does, but in its own smart way. By not restricting you in facing the consequence of poor planning and action, you have the freedom to explore and figure out solutions in your own way. Oh, and the irritation of misclicking or selecting the wrong ability is immediately rectified when I remembered that I can just rewind. This does arguably make the game easier in this regard, in the sense that there's really no risk involved. There's no chance to hit on both you and the enemies, and there's no forward progression if you fail, so the game does want you to always guarantee success. It does feel more like solving a puzzle where you always have to find the correct answer. So if you prefer that sense of risk gameplay, Wizards is not going to be that game for you. But if you like the sense of experimenting and finding a tactical solution to winning combat, then Wizards will definitely scratch that itch. The game's story was actually a surprising fun point for me. While of course it's an interesting amalgamation of magic and modern warfare, there's actually a fair bit of military drama and espionage involved. Having come into the game completely blind with no prior knowledge of what the setting was, I initially thought it was going to be more of a parody story of sorts. Instead, it actually has an interestingly semi-serious story. It essentially involves Zan trying to figure out why his former commanding officer is going on a military rampage across the world, and his ragtag group of friends that he comes across, including the main protagonist Jen, are the only ones that can stop her. It actually reminded me of the very first Modern Warfare game in terms of the overall scope and premise of the military campaign, taking place across different countries and locations while also intersecting with each country's military campaigns. It's surprisingly detailed and one that I enjoyed alongside Wizards' other most enjoyable story aspect, which is its characters. Despite the semi-serious tone of the overall plot, the characters are some of the funniest bunch of idiots that you'll come across, each with their own personality that you'll have to contend with or rely on when you meet them. Individually, they can be very funny and interesting, but when the game lets you banter with each and every one of them, it's a very fun time. Zan can be absurd most of the times, Jen is adorably witty, Banks will always be morbidly depressing, but what necromancer slash med student isn't? It's a motley crew of individuals that doesn't take itself too seriously, but somehow works, especially when they're stupidly good at clearing rooms. It's a fun and interesting premise that fits the magical military tone of Tactical Breach Wizards very well. If you're in the mood for a setting that is funny, witty, somehow serious and not so serious all at the same time, then this game will not disappoint. On the presentation side, the game is clearly not trying to be intense in terms of graphics, but it is trying to look distinct. Though polygonal and cartoony in terms of its design, the mix of modern, military, and fantasy gives the game its absurdly comical aesthetic. Characters have wands attached to the barrel of their guns or suppressors attached to their wands. Some wear tactical gear but also have potions on their hip belt. Druids wear suits and work for the mafia. It's a modern fantasy mishmash that gives the game so much charm. Sound design is pretty on point too. In terms of music, the game hits you hard with the more low beats and percussion to emphasize the more serious and military aspect of the game. Sound effects also feel appropriate to each source, and the mix of whimsical and magical sounds, along with the more weapon sounds, makes for a very interesting soundscape. There's also some fun distinction between the characters when they're talking, as different sound effects are played for each person. Lastly, speaking on the game's technical side, I had no issues running the game whatsoever. Maybe I'm just used to similar tactical games in the same vein having performance issues, glitches, even some targeting issues, looking at you XCOM, but Wizards did not have a single issue on my playthrough, other than the one weird visual health bar glitch, but that was literally it. I believe others have spoken that the game runs well on the Steam Deck, so if you'd rather play on the toilet, you're good to go there. Though please verify in the comments if that is the case. So yeah, that's Tactical Breach Wizards. At a story completion of 22 hours with a whole lot of side missions that I still have yet to complete, it was a whole lot of fun and one of the best turn-based tactics games that I've gotten to play in a while. I think the emphasis on the experimentation part is the biggest reason I'm all for it, and the whole setup with trying to get the best executed plan. It's kind of like you're doing the planning and action phase all in one go, but instead you get to execute it in real time and rewind it back if it's not in your favor. If you're looking for replayability, there's a mission editor for you to try, as well as player-made missions if you want to see what the community has in store. Not to mention you can tweak the difficulty to your liking if it's either too easy or too hard. Outside of gameplay, if you're down for some good humor, the game's got you covered there as well. As for the audience who would enjoy this game the most, if you're a fan of planning and execution style of tactics gameplay, then Wizards is a must. But if you're coming from the expectation of XCOM levels of campaign, time, and combat pressure, then this might not be the game for you. If you're new to turn-based tactics, this would be a really good starting point since it is very forgiving. As for me, this was a very fun experimental puzzle-esque tactics game and one of the best I've gotten to play this year. Thanks for watching everyone. There will be more games to play and even more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned if you'd like to see more. But for now, I'll see you all next time.